is the queen bee. She's hands down the most important bee in the colony. Just like at my house, the queen rules with an iron fist. She is in charge. This is a picture of a queen bee, and we call this a queen and her court. She gets the name a queen bee because she literally does nothing for herself. She does not feed herself. She even gets fed a mixture of royal jelly that another bee will partially digest for her before it gets out, and they will regurgitate it and give it to her, so that she doesn't even have to cause the energy of digesting. Yes.
Excuse me. You said that she doesn't do anything, but she does everything. She controls the whole colony.
That's a good point. She controls the whole colony. She doesn't work with her body, she works with her voice, so to speak. Yeah. She works smarter, not harder. Thank you for that. But she doesn't do any actual physical labor herself. They don't even want her to waste the energy of digesting her own food, like I was saying. So one bee will ingest it, work it with the enzymes, and then give it to her. Every bee that surrounds her will follow her everywhere she goes in that hive, doing a certain job for her. Some are cleaning her, some are feeding her, some are keeping her at the right temperature, fanning her with those wings. Every bee circling her has a job. And the queen bee never leaves the hive. So when she uses the restroom, there is an attentive bee there that will actually pick that up, ingest it, fly it out of the hive, and regurgitate it out, so that excrement isn't kept in the hive. So she really is pampered. There is one bee, or one queen bee, I'm sorry, per colony, and they just let them be, I guess.
Let them be.
That's my bee pun. All right. Sorry. So where was I? There's one queen bee per colony. Regardless of how many boxes high that stack is, sometimes my boxes, if I'm trying to do a certain project, I'll get them 5 or 6 boxes high. That is still just one queen bee. If another queen bee were to try to move in there for some reason, they would kill her. They run off the pheromones. All their communication is off smells. So if that queen bee doesn't smell like their mama, they will execute her. Just all for the better of the hive. So we have that one queen bee, and her main job, the only thing she does, the only labor she will perform, is laying eggs. And the queen bee is a magnificent egg layer. She lays about 2,500 eggs a day, which is quite a bit. If you look at one of the human's main food sources, which is going to be a chicken egg, there's eggs everywhere. Go look at the grocery stores, you'll see eggs. Those chickens lay 1 egg per day. That's when they're healthy and taken care of and feel protective and have the right diet. So if you're looking at something from laying 1 egg a day, and we consider that an amazing food source, to something that's laying 2,500 eggs a day, that's a pretty phenomenal difference. So she's a really amazing bee. And so a lot of people ask me, what makes a queen bee a queen bee? And that is a great question. And what makes a queen bee is something called royal jelly. It's this lotiony looking substance that's in that is called a queen cell, but we'll get into that later if we need to. But that lotiony looking substance is called royal jelly, and that is the main difference between a worker bee and a queen bee. A worker bee larva is fed that royal jelly for the first 3 days of its life in gestation period. The queen bee, if they need a queen bee, they will feed her her entire gestation period, and in fact that's the only thing she eats for her entire life. An adult worker bee only eats honey. An adult queen bee will only eat royal jelly. Royal jelly is an extremely nutrient-rich, protein-packed substance. It has kind of a sweet and tangy taste. It's extremely expensive. There are Asian beekeepers that specialize in the production of royal jelly. They sell it for about $150 an ounce. They believe that it cures any and everything. Women put it on their face to get rid of wrinkles. Cancer patients eat it to shrink their cancer cells. And I don't know the science behind it. I don't know if it works, but if you talk to somebody that believes in it, man, they really do believe that. And the price dictates that, for sure. So that's a little bit about the queen bee. And so I said they make their queen bee. So obviously there has to be bees and, you know, an established hive for a queen bee, for bees to make the queen. So let's just get rid of these guys. Just throw them over there. Just leave them. Just leave them. Yeah, just leave them. So when a beehive gets too packed, or they decide they're running out of room in their home, they will do what's called swarming. And I have a picture of that here. And that's this. If you're ever seeing something and you just see thousands and thousands of bees just flying in every different direction, that's a swarm. And that is the only time a queen bee will leave her hive, and it's an old queen bee. She's going to be about 3 years old when she swarms. And this is when the bees decide they are running out of room and they need to move somewhere else. So it's a colony decision. Every decision made is made for the best of the colony. There is no thought of I in a honey bee colony. It's always about the colony. So they make a group decision and they release pheromones, and then once the entire colony is releasing those pheromones saying, yes, we're running out of room, then they will decide to swarm. And that decision is actually not made by the queen. The queen does not want to swarm. It's forced upon her. In fact, they force her to stop laying eggs, they stop feeding her, and they keep her moving the entire time. So they're basically making her run laps in the hive. And the reason for that is she's extremely large. She's about 3 to 4 times the size of a regular honeybee. And just a neat fact about honeybees is they don't pay attention to physics, because the laws of physics tell you that a honeybee should not be able to fly. Their wings are too light to support the weight of their body. But bees just don't care what the scientists say. They're going to fly anyway. But that queen bee, because she is so heavy and her wings are the same size as the other honeybees, she really can't fly more than 10 to 15 yards at a time. So they make her lose weight before she can fly. So they stop feeding her, they make her run those laps, and then again, when the colony decides, okay, she's at a good enough size to where she can leave the hive, they kick her out. And with her goes about 60% of those bees. And in a average size bee colony, you're looking at about 20,000 individual bees. And so 60% of those 20,000 will just start flying everywhere looking for a home. And where they know their home is wherever mama goes. So if mama rests on a tree branch, you're going to see this. It is just a big ball of bees. You're looking at probably about 10 to 15, 20,000 bees there. It's an amazing sight to see. And at this point, they're super docile, they're super calm. This is not something I recommend you doing, but you really could just walk up to those bees and grab a handful of them and pull them up to you and look at them, and they will have no desire to sting you. In fact, they won't even care that you're there. It's a really neat experience. You can learn a lot about bees in their swarming state because of how calm they are. Again, I do not recommend doing that. So at that point, queen bee lands, and that's when the original colony that swarmed will make the new queen. And that's how and why the queen making process happens. So we have mating flight, and she is so heavy because she goes on what we call a mating flight, which is this. She will mate with about 15 to 20 drones. Drones are male bees. Right after they do their job in the air, they die. So a male bee, you will never see a male bee out working the fields. They don't do that. Male bees are like the worthless uncle that's on the sitcoms that lives in the basement and plays computer games all day and drinks beer. That's
They're lazy.
They're lazy. A drone bee's one job is to be a daddy. That is it. They are a complete drain on society. They do nothing productive except be a daddy. In fact, when it comes wintertime, they're such a drain on society, and they're a little bigger than the other bees, and they just sit around and be lazy and eat honey. the female workers, for the better of the hive, for the survival of winter, will chew their legs and wings off and fly them out of the hive and drop them off. So come November, I'll be walking in the bee yard and there'll be all these drones just rolling around. Some of them will have 2 legs, some of them won't, but none of them have wings. They're all just walking, and it's like, oh, what's going on here? It just looks like all this carnage, but that's the natural process to keep that colony surviving. Because in the wintertime, those male bees aren't going to go out on any mating flights with new queens, and so it really is just a drain, and it gets hard for that colony to survive winter. So drones, as important as they are kind of unimportant as well. But if we lose them, we lose honeybees. So that is a little bit about the drone. A neat thing about the drone that not really that many people know, is they don't have stingers. A stinger is not meant to be a defensive mechanism. It was created by God to be a reproductive organ. It's called an ovipositor. And the purpose of an ovipositor is to guide the eggs down to where they're intended to go. So the queen, she reaches sexual maturity because of her diet. The worker bees do not. So the queen bee's sexual organs are smooth and have a job to do, and they're intended to do that job. A worker bee's ovipositor has not developed properly, and so it's jagged and corkscrew shaped, which is the reason why they do die when they sting us. It's not the act of stinging us that kills them. We have elasticity in our skin, so they can't pull out that stinger. So when they fly away, those organs that are attached to, because it is an organ, stays in our skin, and the rest of them go away. In fact, if I were to get stung by a bee right here and just let it sit there for about 6 seconds, it would actually start spinning in a counterclockwise motion and release itself and fly away. It would cause me some pain, because the entire time that it's spinning, it's just going to be pumping its venom sacs full of venom into me, which is not a comfortable feeling. Even for me, I've been stung thousands of times. I don't react, but I'm not going to sit there and watch a bee sting me. When it happens, I pull it out. Why'd you do that? It was always something I did incorrectly that a bee stings me. They don't want to sting by nature. They're a very gentle species. So when I do get stung, it's all in the fault of the beekeeper. It's never on the fault of the bees. Which brings me into a good segue to my next topic, which is the stinging of bees. And I'm sure a lot of you have been stung by bees. Most of you probably, yeah. And a lot of you would probably say it's in your foot or the back of your hand, or you were driving and it came through a window and hit you. 90% of the bee stings that happen in the world are an accident. Bees do not want to sting you. The only reason a bee will knowingly say, I'm going to sting this person and give my life to protect something, is when they feel that their colony is in danger. The stings that happen out here are completely accidental. Those bees don't mean to sting you. I'm sure most of you know what a reflex is. You all know what a reflex. I used to watch cartoons that the doctor would like hit somebody's knee or whatever, and the bee would fly up. That's a reflex, and a honeybee's reflex is to sting. And so even when they don't know it, when they're smashed or have a certain amount of pressure put on them or slapped, their reflex is to sting. They don't want to sting. They don't know that they're stinging. It just happens. So all these stings that happen out in the world are accidental. Victor said it earlier. If you leave them alone, they're going to leave you alone. They don't want to sting you. I showed a little girl yesterday. There was a lavender bush. It probably had about 50 to 100 bees on it. Her parents wanted her to go in there to take a picture. And she's like, no, there's bees. I'm scared. And I said, I like, listen, they're not going to touch you. And I went like that with all those bees. And about 100 bees flew up. And then they waited for the flowers to stop moving, and they went right back down. They don't care about me. They're out there to do their job, and that's all they want to do. So bees don't want to sting you. The only reason they will is if they feel that their queen or their colony is threatened or attacked. And there are a few things that would make them feel that way. Mainly the beekeeper making mistakes. And when that happens, you pay for it with a sting. So it's completely accidental. They don't want to sting you, which is the reason in this swarm state, I said they're gentle, they're docile, they won't sting you, because they're homeless. They literally have nothing to protect, so they don't care. They're like, yeah, whatever. If you kill me, you kill me, but mama's right over there, so I'm not going to waste my life by stinging you. It has no bearing on them. Now, if I were to get into the swarm and like find the queen and start pinching her, she does have a threat call called a queen piping. It sounds like a little scream, like dee, 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 dee. And if you're in a beehive and you hear that, just gently put the frames down and walk away, because that's a queen piping. That's her saying that she's scared and telling all of her guards to attack whatever's scaring her. So if you ever hear queen piping, if you're ever getting into beekeeping and you hear piping, just very calmly walk away, because you're offending them for some reason. And they're finicky. If you offend them, they'll sting you. So what's my next segue? So that's the drones. That's the okay. And so the bees are out here working. I have bees out here. That is for pollination. Without honeybees doing their job of pollination, about 80% of our food would go away. And I like to eat. I don't know about you guys. And people think, oh, well, I don't really eat salads that much, and yeah, that's just fruits and vegetables. But that's actually not the case, because a lot of the meat we eat eats fruits and vegetables and grains that depend on the grazing. My brother's this guy who won't eat a salad, and I offered him a salad. He said, no, that's what my food eats. And so if your food doesn't have food, then your food doesn't exist either. So they're a super important part of nature. I saw a hand being raised up here. Was there a question? You? No? No? Okay. Question here?
No, yeah, the bees, when you keep them here, do you keep them all year round, or is it certain times that you have to put them out and take them away? Or?
Oh, that's a good question. He said the bees that are here, are they here all the time, or do I move them? My bees are constantly moving. They move with what's called the nectar flow, or basically a food source. So I start with almonds, and that's my first move in the year from my overwintering yard. So they go into almonds, and really in almonds they're technically still asleep. So I have to wake them up and go do your job. And but that's the first time I move them, and then we move them from almonds to oranges to cherries to watermelon to lavender, and then back to my overwintering yard. But they're constantly moving, chasing that nectar flow, because that's a natural food source. When I take them to the overwintering yard, it's what we call a dearth, which means there's no natural availability of food. And at that point, I take them to an overwintering yard, and I give a lot of supplemental feed to get them through winter. The honeybee won't fly if it's below 55 degrees. And so if it's below 55 degrees for a prolonged period of time, the only food they will have is what's in their box. So I have to supplementally feed, yes.
So the ones that we see in the Delano, Bakersfield, Fresno fields, and the stone fruits, like the peaches, the apricots, they're from you or somebody else?
Those are most likely from somebody else. The only stone fruit I do is cherries. And there is a very small farmer, and he owns a lot of land, but does a little farming. It was just a side project he did. And my overwintering yard belongs to him, and he trades me pollination in the spring for using his wintering yard. I use it all year round. I have seed trains in there that I store stuff in, and I built sheds there or whatever. I use it like it's mine. But the stone fruit, those are the only stone fruit, but they're doing the same thing. They're chasing that nectar flow, and the stone fruit is something that the farmers will actually pay a premium to the beekeeper, because they need the pollination in order to get big enough marketable fruit. The stone fruit doesn't need bees to produce the fruit, but it does help in the size of the fruit and the amount that you're getting. So it's worth it for that farmer to put out a premium for the bees to get brought to their land, so they have more marketable fruit. That's a very good question.
So,
yes.
So in each box, you said there's a queen. Each box. Do you ever get two queens, or you can't have two queens, or?
So that is also a good question, and most of the time it's one queen.
Okay.
The other queen, her first job upon birth is to go find what I showed you is a queen cell. That's when a queen is being is in her gestation period, and that queen's first job is to go and find any other queen cells and kill them before they hatch.
Oh.
And if one of them does hatch while she's in the process of finding those other queen cells, they will literally fight to the death, and the strongest one rules the colony. Now, in very, very rare cases, there will be two queens, and that is in a mother-daughter case, where the colony knows that the queen is so old that her laying pattern is what it's called, gets spotty or weak. So she can lay about 2,500 eggs a day, but when that slows down to about 1,500 and that's all she can do, then they will create a daughter queen of that same bee's genetics, and the mother will train the daughter, so to speak. That is a very, very rare case. Most of the time they just kill the other queens. I don't know why. Sometimes they feel the need to train and raise their daughter to take over their throne. Actually, nobody does. It's something that UC Davis has put some money into, to turn around and say, after 2 years of this and $500,000 of this, we found out that we know exactly what we did when we started. So nobody knows why, but I would say about 99% of the time it's one queen, and that other queen will actually physically kill any other queens that come into there, especially if it's from another hive. Sometimes there's what we call robber bees. If there's a really strong hive and a really weak hive, that really weak hive will try to move into the strong hive to try to make themselves survive. As soon as that queen gets in there, it's going to be like a battle royale. I have a video of it on my bees fighting all over the outside of the box. They're stinging each other. It's a crazy bee fight. And that is exactly what I described. I caught a swarm at a customer's house, and I didn't want to drive it all the way to my wintering yard because it was down the street from my house. And I just said, well, I'm just going to bring it home then. And so it just stayed in my backyard for a while, and then the same thing happened a couple weeks later where somebody called me and they had a beehive in their compost bin, and so they were like, this is the third time bees have moved into this compost bin, just take the whole bin. And so I took the whole bin and took it to my house, and I started shaking the bin around, just, get out of here. They did. They went out and they moved into that box where the weaker bees were because they smelled the honey, they smelled the eggs. They said, this is home, and so I don't have to go make a whole new home. It's already made for me right here. And the queen bees, I don't know which one survived, but they fought to the death, and that became one. One very strong, because it was two semi-weaks, and then it turned into one very strong. And, it's very, very rare, but it's something that does happen. That's a really good question. Any other questions?
Yeah, what store do you guys send your honey?
There are a few stores that we send our honey to, and I know as the owner of the company I should know that information. But my wife actually does all the sales, and she's on that end of it all. I know that there's a boutique called Bratcher Home Designs that sells our honey.
Is it Bakersfield?
In Bakersfield, yes, it's downtown. There's a local produce delivery company that they deliver, they're called CSA boxes, and they deliver weekly produce to people's houses, and they sell our honey too, and they add it to their boxes occasionally. And there's a few other places. There's a bakery that sells it, baked good shop. It's something baked goods or something like that.
In Bakersfield.
Yes, it's in Bakersfield. They're all in Bakersfield. And then we sell it online at our website, and then we do like front porch pickup at our house. If
you guys sell the comb,
we do sell the comb only during certain times a year. The comb is 100% wax. And most of my beehives, I will put what's called a foundation in this frame. So this is a frame here, and I'll put a foundation that's been dipped in beeswax to give them a starter. And in that case, I cannot harvest the comb out because there's a piece of plastic in the middle. But I will keep a few of them during a few years to harvest the comb. But in that case, I can only harvest that box one time a year, as opposed to when they have the foundations, I get about 5 harvests a year. So it's a very big difference. And the reason why they make it so much faster with the foundation is to make an ounce of beeswax, a bee has to eat about 1.5 pounds of honey. So the ratio to the honey they're making to the beeswax they're making is just night and day. So if you use a foundation that's been dipped in beeswax, they will actually chew that beeswax and repurpose it, and then they don't have to make it themselves, which makes the process a lot faster. But during certain times of the year, it's usually right before fall, we'll have what we call it chunk honey, and that's when it has the comb and everything in it. So right before fall hits, if you go to our Instagram or our Facebook or our website, we'll have it up on that. Yes.
I got 2 questions. who's the biggest enemy of the bee? I know a couple of years ago they talked about the wasps. And the second question is the honey, the color of the honey.
These are really good questions. All right. The first question is, who's the biggest enemy of the bee? And about 10 years ago, the bee population started really declining. And so we put a lot of money into it. Not we, the world, put a lot of money into it to try to figure out why. At first, they thought it was pesticides or something that man was doing, which did play a little part of it. But the biggest part of it is a parasite called the varroa mite. And that varroa mite is not indigenous to the United States of America. It got brought in about 15 years ago, actually on an almond tree from Italy. And when it got brought in, it wasn't a problem because it didn't eat. It was not a parasite to the honeybee. It ate the almond flour and the almond pollen. But somehow it just developed and decided to evolve to be a parasite and feed on the actual blood of the honeybee. How that happened, I have no idea. But so they decided to feed on the blood of the honeybee. The adult varroa mite attaches himself and physically puts life suckers into the adult honeybee and feeds on them, and then infects them with various viruses and whatnot that we have to take care of. And probably the most devastating part of the varroa mite is they will lay their egg simultaneously in a cell next to so does the varroa mite egg, and that varroa mite egg will actually eat the entire body and flesh of that developing honeybee, so that viruses and deformities that will be looked at as a drain on the colony, so the other bees will actually kill it and fly it away, because there's no point in keeping a handicapped bee alive. Every bee has to do a job. If they can't do their job, they're exterminated. It's all for the better of the colony. So that question was the color of the honey, and I really like that question because the color of the honey also coincides with the flavor of the honey. Depending on what the bees are foraging on is how you get that color. So I have a orange blossom honey in my little jars. It's a nice golden amber color, has a really mild flavor. In my honey sticks, I have my wildflower honey, and it almost looks like molasses, very dark, very rich in flavor, has an almost buttery taste, where it literally tastes like toast with butter, and like it's got a real buttery taste. Then also in the sticks, I have some clover honey, and if it's true clover honey, it has a cinnamony taste. A lot of people even say it smells like cinnamon, and that's a very light colored, almost clear honey. It has very little color to it at all, but a very robust flavor. And then there's honeys that it's not produced here in America, but a soybean honey is actually 100% clear. There's zero color to it whatsoever, and there's very little flavor to it as well. In fact, soybean honey, because it's so cheap and worthless, a lot of people will buy it from overseas and blend it with a flavorful honey so that they can market and say, oh, this is our clover honey, when really it's about 55% clover honey and about 45% trash. But that trash honey has such little flavor that it takes on the flavor of that clover honey. I mean, that's not a really honest thing to do, but that is what a lot of beekeepers in the industry do. I don't blend mine. I'm such a small beekeeper that I do what's called small batch honey, and I don't even mix the boxes. So I'll get 7 gallons out of this box and I'll keep that separate, and I get 7 gallons out of this box and I'll keep that separate, or 15 gallons out of this box, and so I have it all. And even in the same location, going from box to box to box, there will be slight differences in color, taste, aroma. It's extremely neat. So it all depends on whatever the bees bring back and whatever they're making to get that color.
Do you see a difference in, say you go to another state, apples and apples here in California? Is there a difference between the honey, or you just don't? It's not.
There is really not that detectable. The clover honey here and the clover honey North Dakota is and Nebraska, they're the main producers of clover honey. The clover honey here has a little less cinnamony taste, but it still has those notes. So it's just not as packed of a flavor, but it has the same type of flavor, if that makes any sense at all. Some of them will be a little stronger, of a flavor. Some of them will be like a thicker consistency, but if they're made with the same type of apple or the same type of flower, it's going to be somewhere near that commercial expectation of that type of honey. That's a good question. Anything else before?
I got a question.
Yes.
Okay.
I love it.
So you were saying about how the male bees who impregnate the queen bee, they have a stinger.
They do not have a stinger.
They don't have a stinger. So the ones that do have a stinger,
No male bees will have a stinger.
only the female.
Only the female bees will have a stinger, yes. And the reason for that is the stinger is a female reproductive organ.
And because females are meaner.
Well,
Yeah.
you said it, not me. But it's a reproductive organ. It's the equivalence of humans' ovaries.
Okay.
So males don't have those.
Yes. The females are like, I will stab you, and the males are like,
Right. It's like why we call oh, she went mama bear, you know, like, oh, don't make her go mama bear. It's time. You have a question, sweetheart.
I have a question.
Then they drink honey away from flowers.
That is an awesome piece of insight. What she said is they drink honey away from flowers, and the way they make the honey is they get the nectar from the flowers. It's not honey yet, it's nectar, and they have a special tongue that's just like a straw. It's called a proboscis. That's a big word. I don't expect anybody to remember that.
Then they turn it
into honey. And the magical thing about the way they turn it into honey is we've tried in labs to reproduce what they do, but we can't do it. They have what's called a honey stomach, and they ingest that nectar into their honey stomach. It mixes with some enzymes that they create, and we have tried and spent millions of dollars to, well, not me, the industry has spent millions of dollars to try to recreate those enzymes, and they can't do it. So God's perfect and we aren't. But they'll take that nectar from the flower, and then they actually give it to another honeybee when they get home. So they get home, they go inside, and then they'll give it to one of their sisters, and they'll say, here, take this. And then their sister, they share. That's right, because sharing is caring. That's what Jesus says. And so they share it with their sister, then their sister will mix it in their tummy with their enzymes that are, every bee's enzyme is just a little bit different, but they all do the same thing, and that's why we can't recreate it. So then they'll mix it with that second bee's enzyme, and then they'll place it into a piece of honeycomb, which looks like this. It's just this nice, fresh, white wax, and at that point, it's still not honey. So it's not honey until all the moisture has been taken out of it. So those bees need to dehydrate it, and they don't have dehydrators. They can't plug it into a wall. So what they do is they will stand on that, and they'll rub their feet on top of the beeswax to create heat. They fan their wings super, super fast to create a fan and create air movement. And that heat, along with that air movement, I'll get to you in just a second, sweetie, creates a lot like a dehydrator, and it does push the moisture out of that honey. And then when the honey is at 17% moisture, how they know it's at 17% moisture, we don't know. We have to have tools and special, honeybees are friends, that's right. We have to have special tools to test it and to see if it's at that 17% moisture, and they just know. And it doesn't matter if you go to Italy, America, anywhere, all across the world, and you open up a box of honey and they have honey that's capped, they'll put a wax, okay, and they'll put a wax cap over the top of it when it's at 17% moisture, and it's always at an exact 17.1% moisture. They're brilliant creatures, and we don't know how they know that it's at 17% moisture, but they do. And so once it's at that 17% moisture, they produce more wax, and they will actually cover this top of this cell with wax, and that's their way of storing it putting it in a jar and storing it on a shelf for later. And once they put that wax cap on it, it never goes bad. Yes, sir.
I have a strange question. We have bees for 30 years that's been
50,
in
60.
our chimney, in the wall. Should we move them? If so, how? If we don't move them, is it okay just to leave the honey in there and let it go?
Oh, that's a good question. So the question was, he's had a honeybee colony living in the walls of his chimney for like 50, 60 years. He was asking, what's the damage of leaving that comb in the home? Should they eradicate them? Should they not?
It's in a fireplace.
In a fireplace, like actually in the fireplace.
Yeah, we have 2 fireplaces, and they inhabit the top one, and the bottom one still has.
It's usable and whatnot. Yeah. So should you get rid of them? If it's bricks, they probably aren't going to hurt the foundation of the chimney, so you don't really have to worry about that. If you were in a drywall wall, like a new construction or anything, I would say definitely have to get rid of them, because the weight of that honey will eventually crack the walls. It's really crazy, but when this is filled with honey, it weighs about 20 pounds. That's a lot of honey. And so it'll eventually break those walls and cause damage to the walls themselves. What you are probably going to be most worried about is pests. Things like that are going to attract rats, they're going to attract other bugs, because they're going in to take that honey. And it's very accessible to them at that point. So they just see a year-round food source, especially in the wintertime when food sources are scarce. And the bees are going to be less active because they're worried about keeping their queen at a certain temperature to keep her alive. So if a rat comes and takes some honey, they don't care.
We only had, I think it's in the fire. I think it's.
Yeah, so if there's not easy access to rodents, then it's really not something you worry about. The only reason I would say to get rid of it is if they're coming in your home, they're bothering you, they're stinging people. Otherwise, I would honestly just leave it.
We get a lot of lemons.
Yeah, you're going to have great pollination. You can grow a flourishing garden, and they're a gentle species. They're not gonna want to attack you. They're not gonna, oh, I'm guarding my hive. I mean, unless you jump up there and start shaking their comb or something, or stick a stick down there.
Or painting the house.
They didn't like that.
Painting the house, they're not gonna like because of the smell of the
No.
paint.
Yeah.
They
attacked one of our gardeners because he had a smelly lawn.
Yeah, and also the vibration of the lawnmowers, they don't like that either, because it's like they think that something's shaking their house. So lawn equipment, they'll tend to, I don't like to say get aggressive toward that, but they get protective. They all have their job to do, and a lot of bees are guard bees, and they'll do their job.
The honey builds up and builds up and builds up and never goes away. Is that what you're saying?
It doesn't build up and build up and build up and never go away, but they make more than they can eat. And they'll eat it in the wintertime. So it'll just sit there and sit there and sit there, and then in the wintertime, it's just there for the picking.
I think we've got the good ecosystem.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say that it's something you would have to eradicate unless it's super bothering you, unless it's causing foundational problems to your home, causing pests and rodents and ants or whatever. Just let them be.
We've gone 20-something years. We'll let them stay.
But they were there 30 or 40 years prior to us buying those.
Yeah, and there's no problem there. My grandmother has a house that she's lived in for 70 years, and they've had a beehive in the wall for that entire 70 years. And she contacted me a few years ago. She's like, she's 92, and she's like, I am gonna die soon, so I want you to take this beehive out, so when I give it to whoever I give it to, they don't have to worry about it. And I'm like, Grandma, I'm not cutting into your house that was built in like 1906. I'm not gonna do that. I'm sorry. But they had no problems, and and they never bothered anybody. But she's given the house to one of my cousins, and she wanted to take care of it, so she tinted the house for 30 days, thinking that would take care of it. And as soon as they removed that tint, man, those bees were buzzing, and they're just as strong as ever.
Yeah, transporting bees day and night. How
do I transport bees? How do I get those bees there?
Well,
to go over there.
Yeah, and
that's a good question. It is at night, like you said. So when I transport the bees, I do it all at night, because all these bees that are working right here, we have about 30 to 40% of bees in the colony out foraging. That's the last job they do in the hive. That's basically how they work themselves to death, is to go out and forage. But we want to give them the opportunity to come back home, so that I'm not losing 40% of my hive when I move them. So at nightfall, it's kind of a cumbersome process, but we keep them on pallets. There's 4 hives per pallet. At nightfall, we come with a smoker, just put a good amount of smoke around all of them to that does a couple of things. It blocks their pheromones, where that's how they all communicate. So if one of the bees does say, oh, we're under attack, so you need to go attack them, the only thing they're smelling isn't that signal to attack, they're smelling the smoke. And then in nature, they live in trees and hollow logs, and sometimes trees and hollow logs catch on fire in nature, and so the bees get tricked into thinking that their home they picked is on fire. And so they're worried about saving their colony and gorging on as much honey as they can, so when they have time to make a new house, they'll have the energy to do so. So defending their burning home is the last of their worries. So I'll puff it with smoke real good, and then we take a forklift, lift the whole pallet up, stack it on top of another pallet, and then we'll take the forklift and we'll put 2 pallets at a time on the back of a flatbed truck, and we load it all up like that, strap them down, and drive them. Some states require that we put nets over them when you're transporting honeybees. California is not one of them. I don't really have a problem with them leaving the box, for 2 reasons. One, it's at night and they naturally want to be in their box to keep warm. And the second is, as soon as I start driving, I'm driving 70 miles an hour, so that simulates 70-mile-an-hour winds. And they know that if they go out there with how light they are at 70-mile-an-hour winds, it's going to be pretty devastating to them. So they will stay in the box, and that's the bulk of transporting them. In the morning, sometimes it's a long drive, and I have to unload like as the sun's coming up, and I try to just do the same process in reverse, but at that point in time there's a lot of bees coming out because the sun's coming out, and so you just have to kind of work with the elements that you're giving. Sometimes you have to do it during the day just because I had to drive 6 hours to get here and the sun's coming up, and I'm what am I going to do, leave them in my truck and leave it there and come back and unload them at night? But that's a really good question. Yeah, the bulk of it happens at night, and then I have to move bees all night and then go back to work in the morning, and so it could be tiresome. That's during that season is what we call crunch time, and I'll work sometimes 20 hours a day, 22 hours a day, 7 to 8, 7 days a week. It's not something I enjoy working like that, but it is very when I get to enjoy the fruits of my labor, and it's time to calm down, and I get this honey, and I get it's worth it. Any other questions? Oh, one thing I wanted to I forgot to talk about this when I was talking about the queen bee. I think I kind of hovered over it. The queen bee, she lives 5 years, or can live up to 5 years, whereas a worker bee, they live 28 days. So that's a very big difference in the lifespan. My mom always told me that you are what you eat. And the biggest reason why that queen bee does live so much longer than the regular honeybee, or worker bee, I'm sorry, is her diet. Her diet is so healthy that it means the difference of 28 days to 5 years. So I mean, it's just an incredible substance. And the second reason is because she doesn't do anything, and the other ones will work themselves to is exhaustion. Yes?
So if they all eat honey, like what's the difference between her honey diet versus the...
She doesn't eat honey. She doesn't eat honey, no. The queen bee, the only thing she eats is a substance called royal jelly. It's an excretion from the underside of the abdomen of a honeybee. They excrete it in very, very small amounts, and they can't get to it themselves because it's on the under portion. So they'll make what's called a bee chain, where they're linking each other's legs up together, and they will actually scrape that excretion from the next bee and put it in their honey stomach, and then go and install it in a cell or feed it to the...
They just like consolidate a bunch of it?
Yeah, they consolidate a bunch of it and put it together. It takes probably 500 bees to make a ½ ounce of royal jelly. It's really hard to get, but it's a miracle substance, and because of that diet, it makes the difference of 5 years to 28 days. And then she doesn't do any actual work except for labor. So I said the bees will go and work themselves to death, and they actually will. They'll come out here and forage on something and go back and forage and go back, and they won't stop when they're completely devastated and out of energy. They'll just want to keep going, and they'll come out here and not have the energy to make it back into the hive. Nightfall will come. They'll be the wrong temperature because they won't have their sisters to keep them at the right temperature, and they'll die. So between those two factors, it makes the difference of 28 days to 5 years. Yes?
Does each hive have to have water, or do you just have to have water in the area? I was in court once. I saw the beekeeper got a ticket for no water.
Yeah. They just have to have access to water. It doesn't have to be inside each individual hive, just as long as it's out here available to them. Now these bees here, they actually have a canal right here in the back, and so that serves as my access to water. But a lot of beekeepers, they have to put troughs of water out there, and then they have to put something in the trough for the bees to be able to land on. They can't just go into a puddle of water and drink on it. They have to, like a lot of people will put straw on top of it so they can land on the straw and then put their proboscis into the water. A lot of people will put small like bird feeders and fill them with rocks and then fill them with water so they can land on the rock and kind of go to the water. But they have to have access to water within a certain diameter of space. If not, it's devastating to everybody involved, and there's certain regulations and whatnot I have to follow. But yeah, each individual hive doesn't have to have water; they just have to have access to it in bulk. All right, any other questions before I wrap it up? Nope. If you guys think of any, I'll be over there in the corner booth. Thank you so much for listening to me talk. My favorite thing to do is hear my own voice. I appreciate it. Thank you all for coming out and making the trek to this beautiful place. Yeah, and just God bless you all.
Thank you.